My name is Carter, and 18 months ago, I made a mistake that cost me everything. A moment of poor judgment, a desperate attempt to save my failing business, and a securities fraud charge that landed me in Riverside Federal Correctional Institution with a 5-year sentence and the complete destruction of my previously respectable life. I'd been a financial advisor with my own firm, a nice apartment in downtown Chicago, and what I thought was a secure future. When the 2008 financial crisis hit and clients started pulling their investments, I panicked. Instead of accepting that my business was failing, I created false documents to show profitable returns while using new clients' money to pay existing ones. It was a classic Ponzi scheme, and when it collapsed, it took down 12 families' retirement savings with it. I deserved to be in prison. I knew that, accepted it, and had resolved to serve my time quietly while trying to find some way to make amends for the damage I'd caused. What I hadn't expected was to find myself falling in love with the one person in the facility who represented everything I'd lost: authority, respect, and the power to make decisions about my own life. Warden Isaac Morrison was nothing like what I'd expected from a prison administrator. He was young for his position, maybe mid-30s, with the kind of quiet intelligence that suggested depth rather than harshness. Where I'd anticipated a hardened career corrections officer, I found someone who seemed genuinely interested in rehabilitation rather than just punishment. My first encounter with Warden Morrison came during my initial intake interview, a mandatory meeting where new inmates were assessed for security level and work assignments. I'd been at Riverside for 3 days, still adjusting to the reality of prison life, when I was called to the administrative offices for what I assumed would be a routine bureaucratic process. The warden's office was surprisingly bright and welcoming, with large windows overlooking the prison yard and walls lined with books rather than the institutional metal furniture I'd expected. Isaac Morrison sat behind a simple wooden desk, wearing a navy suit that looked expensive but not ostentatious, and when he looked up from my file, I was struck by the warmth in his dark brown eyes. "Mr. Walker," he said, gesturing for me to sit in the chair across from his desk. "Welcome to Riverside. I know the adjustment can be difficult, so I like to personally meet with inmates who might benefit from specific programs we offer here." "Thank you, Warden. I appreciate that. I've been reviewing your background, and I have to say, your case is somewhat unusual for us. Most of our white-collar offenders are older, career criminals who've been gaming the system for decades. You seem to have been a legitimate financial advisor who made some poor decisions under pressure." His observation was more perceptive than I'd expected from someone in his position. "That's accurate, sir. I made mistakes I'm not proud of, and I understand why I'm here." "Good. Accountability is the first step toward rehabilitation." Isaac leaned back in his chair, studying me with an intensity that was professional but somehow also personal. "Carter, may I call you Carter? I'm interested in placing you in our financial literacy program. We help other inmates learn basic money management skills before their release. I'd be honored to participate, but I'm not sure I'm the right person to be teaching financial responsibility. On the contrary, I think you're exactly the right person. You understand both sides of the equation. You know what legitimate financial planning looks like, and you've experienced the consequences of unethical practices. That perspective could be invaluable to men who've never learned proper money management." There was something about the way Isaac spoke that suggested he saw me as more than just another inmate processing through the system. He was looking at me like I was a person with valuable skills and insights, someone worth investing time and attention in. "I'd like to try," I said. "I owe it to the people I hurt to do whatever I can to prevent others from making similar mistakes." "I was hoping you'd say that." Isaac's smile was genuine, transforming his entire face from professionally pleasant to something warmer and more engaging. "The program meets 3 times a week in the education building. Mrs. Rodriguez will get you the schedule and materials." As I stood to leave, Isaac called my name. "Carter, one more thing. If you have any problems adjusting to life here, or if you need anything, please don't hesitate to reach out." My door is always open. It was a standard offer, the kind of thing prison administrators probably said to every new inmate. But there was something in Isaac's tone that made it feel personal, like a genuine invitation rather than bureaucratic politeness. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into the financial literacy program with an enthusiasm that surprised both the other inmates and the volunteer instructor who ran it. Teaching basic budgeting and investment concepts to men who'd never had checking accounts or credit cards was challenging, but it was also the most fulfilling work I'd done in years. More importantly, it gave me regular opportunities to interact with Warden Morrison, who made a point of observing the classes and checking on the program's progress. "How are things going with the financial program?" Isaac asked one afternoon when he stopped by during one of my sessions. "Really well, actually. These guys are eager to learn, and they ask great questions. Yesterday, Marcus figured out how compound interest could help him save for his daughter's college fund after he gets out. That's exactly what we're hoping to achieve. You're doing excellent work, Carter." The compliment shouldn't have meant as much as it did, but praise from Isaac Morrison felt like something precious and rare. I found myself looking forward to his visits to the program, paying attention to the way he interacted with the other inmates, and trying to understand what made him different from other authority figures I'd encountered in the system. Isaac was fair but not harsh, intelligent but not condescending, and he seemed to genuinely believe that people could change if given the right opportunities. He remembered details about inmates' families and goals, asked thoughtful questions about their progress, and treated everyone with a respect that was unusual in an environment built on power dynamics. 3 months into my sentence, Isaac offered me an additional opportunity that would change the nature of our relationship entirely. "Carter, I have a proposition for you," he said during one of our now regular conversations about the financial literacy program. "I'm working on a comprehensive review of our rehabilitation programs, and I could use someone with your analytical background to help evaluate their effectiveness." "What would that involve?" "Research, data analysis, report writing. It would be part-time work in addition to your regular program duties, but it would give you access to the administrative building and more freedom of movement within the facility." "Why me?" Isaac was quiet for a moment, seeming to consider his answer carefully. "Because you have the skills I need, because you understand both sides of the system, and because I trust your judgment." "You trust my judgment?" "I'm in prison for making catastrophically poor financial decisions. You're in prison for making one series of poor decisions under extreme pressure. That doesn't negate everything else about your character or capabilities." The work Isaac offered was exactly the kind of intellectual challenge I'd been missing since my incarceration. I spent hours analyzing recidivism rates, program completion statistics, and outcome data for various rehabilitation initiatives. It was complex, meaningful work that required me to spend significant time in the administrative building, often working late into the evening when most of the staff had gone home, which meant I spent a lot of time alone with Isaac Morrison. These working sessions revealed sides of Isaac that weren't visible during his official duties as warden. He was passionate about criminal justice reform, frustrated by budget constraints that limited program effectiveness, and deeply committed to the idea that prison should be about rehabilitation rather than just punishment. "Look at these numbers," Isaac said one evening as we reviewed data from the job training programs. "Inmates who complete vocational training have a 40% lower recidivism rate than those who don't. But we can only serve about 30% of our population because of funding limitations. Have you considered partnering with local businesses? Create apprenticeship programs that give inmates real-world experience while providing companies with trained workers." "I've proposed it, but the state bureaucracy moves slowly, and there's still significant prejudice against hiring formerly incarcerated individuals. What if you could show concrete data about the cost savings?" Reduced recidivism means fewer people coming back to prison, which saves taxpayer money. Isaac looked up from the spreadsheet we'd been reviewing. "You know, that's not a bad angle. Frame it as fiscal responsibility rather than social justice." Both are important, but fiscal arguments tend to get more political support. Exactly. Carter, this is why I wanted you working on this project. You understand how to present complex ideas in ways that different audiences can appreciate. Conversations like this became routine during our evening work sessions. We'd start with program data and end up discussing everything from prison reform to philosophy to our personal backgrounds. Isaac told me about his path from criminal justice graduate school to prison administration, his hopes for systemic reform, and his frustration with the political realities that constrained his efforts. I found myself sharing more than I'd intended about my own background, my middle-class upbringing, my parents' disappointment when I was sentenced, my guilt about the families I'd hurt through my financial fraud. Do you ever regret choosing this field? I asked Isaac one evening as we worked late on a report about educational programming. You mean working in corrections? I mean dedicating your career to trying to help people who society has written off as irredeemable. Isaac was quiet for a moment, considering the question. Sometimes I get frustrated by how slowly things change, or how few resources we have to work with. But no, I don't regret it. Every person who successfully reintegrates into society, every family that stays together because someone learned job skills in prison, every crime that doesn't happen because someone got treatment instead of just punishment, that makes it worthwhile. Even when most people don't appreciate what you're doing. Especially then. Carter, the work you're doing on this analysis could help expand programs that change lives. That matters more than public appreciation. There was something about the way Isaac talked about his work, the genuine passion in his voice when he discussed rehabilitation and second chances, that made me see him as more than just the warden of my prison. He was someone fighting for ideals I believed in, someone trying to make positive change in a system that often seemed designed to perpetuate failure. And somewhere along the way, my professional respect for Isaac Morrison began evolving into something much more personal and much more dangerous. The realization that I was developing romantic feelings for the warden hit me like a physical blow during a late-night work session in November. We'd been analyzing data for hours, and Isaac had gotten up to make coffee in the small break room adjacent to his office. When he returned, he handed me a mug and sat down closer than usual, close enough that I could smell his cologne and feel the warmth radiating from his body. "Thank you," I said, accepting the coffee and trying to ignore the way my pulse quickened when our fingers brushed. "For the coffee? For all of this. The work, the opportunity, treating me like someone whose opinions matter. I know you didn't have to do any of it." Isaac looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Carter, can I tell you something?" "Of course." "When I first reviewed your file, I saw someone who'd made mistakes, but wasn't fundamentally different from people I'd known in graduate school or previous jobs. Someone intelligent and principled who'd gotten desperate and made poor choices. That's generous. It's honest. But as I've gotten to know you through this work, I've realized it's more than that. You're thoughtful, dedicated, genuinely committed to making amends for what you did. Isaac paused, seeming to search for the right words. "You're the kind of person I'd want to know outside of these circumstances." The statement hung between us, loaded with implications that neither of us could safely acknowledge. Isaac was telling me, as directly as he could within the constraints of our situation, that his interest in me went beyond professional appreciation. "Isaac," I said quietly, using his first name for the first time, "I need you to know that working with you has been the best part of being here. Not just because of the intellectual stimulation, but because of who you are as a person. Carter, I know this is complicated. I know there are boundaries that can't be crossed, rules that protect both of us. But I needed you to know that these conversations, this time we spend together, it matters to me more than it should." Isaac was very still, and for a moment I thought I'd overstepped irreversibly. Then he reached across the table and briefly covered my hand with his. "It matters to me too," he said quietly. "More than it should, more than is probably wise." We looked at each other across the table, both acknowledging feelings we couldn't act on, both aware that we'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. What do we do now? I asked. Now we continue working together, because this project is important and you're the best person to help complete it. But Carter, we have to be careful. For both our sakes. I understand. But understanding and actually managing the situation turned out to be very different things. Over the next month, our working relationship became increasingly charged with unspoken tension. Isaac would stand closer than necessary when reviewing documents. I would find excuses to stay late when I knew he'd be working. We'd have conversations that were ostensibly about prison programs, but were really about each other, coded exchanges that let us express feelings we couldn't directly acknowledge. The breaking point came in December, during a particularly late working session when we were rushing to complete the program analysis before Isaac's year-end budget meetings. I think that covers the vocational training section, Isaac said, saving the document we'd been working on for hours. We should probably call it a night. Probably. But neither of us moved to leave. Carter, I need to ask you something. What? How much longer do you have on your sentence? 3.5 years, with good behavior. What? Isaac was quiet for a long moment. I keep thinking about what happens when you're released. Whether we'll ever see each other again. Whether this connection we've built will just disappear when you leave here. Isaac, I know it's inappropriate. I know I shouldn't be thinking about it. But Carter, what we have, whatever it is, it's not just professional for me anymore. I looked at Isaac across his office. This man who'd shown me more respect and consideration in 4 months than I'd received from anyone since my arrest. He was risking his career by even acknowledging feelings for an inmate, and I knew that whatever I said next could have consequences for both of us. It's not just professional for me either, I said. Isaac, I think I'm falling in love with you. The admission hung in the air between us, dangerous and honest and irreversible. Jesus, Carter. Isaac rubbed his face with both hands. What are we doing? I don't know. But I know that I've never felt this way about anyone before, and I know that being with you is the only time I don't feel like a prisoner. This is impossible. The ethics violations alone could end my career, never mind the legal implications. I know, and I would never ask you to risk your job or your reputation for me. But Isaac, I need you to know that these feelings are real, regardless of whether we can do anything about them. Isaac stood up and walked to the window overlooking the prison yard, his back to me. Carter, I've built my entire career on maintaining professional boundaries, on treating all inmates fairly and equally. What I feel for you compromises everything I've worked for. So what do we do? I don't know. Isaac turned around, and I could see the conflict in his expression. I care about you more than I should, more than is safe for either of us. But I also have responsibilities to this institution, to the other inmates, to my own professional integrity. I'm not asking you to compromise your integrity. Just by having this conversation, I already am. We stared at each other across the office, both aware that we'd reached a crossroads that would determine the future of our relationship. Isaac, I said finally, what if we didn't have to choose between your career and whatever this is between us? What do you mean? I mean, what if we maintained professional boundaries while I'm here, but kept open the possibility of something more after my release? Carter, that's 3.5 years. I know, but if what we feel is real, if it's worth the risk you're taking by even acknowledging it, then maybe it's worth waiting for. Isaac was quiet for a long time, considering the implications of what I was suggesting. You're asking me to wait 3.5 years for the possibility of a relationship with someone I met in prison. I'm asking you to consider whether what we have is worth preserving, even if we can't act on it right now. And what would that look like? It would look like us continuing to work together professionally, maintaining appropriate boundaries, but with the understanding that when I'm released, we'll explore what might be possible between us as equals. Isaac returned to his chair, looking at me with an expression that was part hope and part disbelief. You realize how crazy this sounds? I realize it's unconventional. But Isaac, conventional relationships haven't exactly worked out well for either of us. Maybe crazy is what we need. You don't know anything about my relationship history. I know you're 34, unmarried, and dedicated enough to your job that you work most evenings and weekends. I know you believe in second chances and rehabilitation. I know you see something in me worth investing time and energy in. And what do you see in me? I see someone intelligent and principled and genuinely committed to making the world better. I see someone who treats people with dignity regardless of their circumstances. I see someone I could love completely if given the chance. Isaac looked at me for a long moment, and I could see him weighing the risks against the possibilities. Okay, he said finally. Okay. We maintain professional boundaries while you're here, but with the understanding that we'll explore a personal relationship after your release. But Carter, I need you to understand what you're asking. 3.5 years is a long time. A lot could change for both of us. I understand, but some things are worth waiting for. The next 18 months passed in a strange state of suspended possibility. Isaac and I continued working together on various projects, maintaining careful professional boundaries while both aware of the deeper feelings beneath our interactions. We never again acknowledged our personal feelings directly, but there was an undercurrent of understanding in every conversation, every shared look, every moment of collaboration. Isaac helped me develop additional programs, including a financial planning workshop for inmates' families and a small business development seminar for those planning to start their own companies after release. The work was meaningful and challenging, and it gave us legitimate reasons to spend time together while maintaining the fiction that our relationship was purely professional. But it was torture, too. Being close to someone you care about while unable to express those feelings, working alongside someone you love while pretending it's just a job, creates a constant state of emotional tension that's exhausting to maintain. How's the family workshop going? Isaac asked one afternoon as we reviewed materials for the program. Really well. We had 12 wives and girlfriends attend last week's session on debt management. Maria said it was the first time she understood why her husband kept getting denied for loans. That's exactly what we were hoping for. Breaking cycles of financial instability helps entire families, not just the inmates. Isaac, can I ask you something? Sure. Do you ever regret the choice we made? The waiting, I mean. Isaac was quiet for a moment. Do you? Sometimes I think it would have been easier to just let our feelings go, to treat this as just a job and you as just my warden. But no, I don't regret it. What about you? Sometimes I think I'm crazy for agreeing to wait for someone who's still in prison for another 2 years. But Carter, what we have feels too important to just abandon. Even though we can't be sure what it will look like when I'm released. Even though, some things you have to take on faith. Conversations like this sustained us through the long months of professional proximity and personal distance. We never crossed physical boundaries, never even shook hands longer than was appropriate for our professional relationship. But we found ways to communicate care and commitment through shared work, through the projects we developed together, through the quiet understanding that we were building something that would outlast my incarceration. The hardest part was watching Isaac navigate the stress of his position while being unable to offer the kind of personal support I wanted to provide. Budget cuts reduced program funding. Political pressure from the state increased focus on punishment over rehabilitation, and Isaac often looked exhausted by the constant battles to maintain the progressive policies he believed in. Rough day, I asked one evening when Isaac seemed particularly drained during our work session. The state's threatening to cut funding for the educational programs. They want to increase capacity by reducing programming space. That's short-sighted. The educational programs have the highest success rates for reducing recidivism. I know that, you know that, but politicians see prison beds and think about tough-on-crime votes, not long-term social outcomes. Is there anything I can do? More data analysis, different ways to present the cost-benefit information. Isaac looked at me with an expression of gratitude that was more personal than professional. Thank you for offering, but this is more about politics than data. Sometimes the right answer isn't enough if it doesn't fit the political narrative. I'm sorry. I know how much these programs mean to you. They mean something to you too. Carter, what we've built here, the work you've done, it's made a real difference in people's lives. Whatever happens with the funding, that matters. Moments like this reminded me why I'd fallen in love with Isaac Morrison. His commitment to doing the right thing even when it was difficult, his genuine care for the people in his charge, his ability to see beyond immediate circumstances to longer-term possibilities. These were the qualities that made him extraordinary, and they were the reason I was willing to wait years for the chance to build a life with him. My release date finally arrived on a cold Tuesday morning in March. I'd been in Riverside for exactly 5 years, and Isaac had been warden for all but the first few months of my sentence. As I processed through the administrative procedures for release, I wondered if our relationship would survive the transition from inmate and warden to two free men exploring the possibility of love. Isaac met me in his office one final time, officially to review my release conditions and parole requirements, but really to acknowledge the end of one phase of our relationship and the beginning of another. "How are you feeling?" he asked as I signed the final paperwork. "Nervous, excited, terrified." I looked up from the documents. "Grateful. For what?" "For everything. The work opportunities, the respect you showed me, the chance to make amends through the programs we developed. For seeing something in me worth preserving. Carter, what you accomplished here, the lives you touched through the financial literacy and family programs, that came from who you are, not from any opportunity one provided. It came from both. Isaac, I need you to know that regardless of what happens between us personally, these 5 years changed my life in ways that go far beyond serving my sentence. They changed my life too." We looked at each other across his desk one last time as warden and inmate, both aware that when I walked out of his office, we'd be crossing into uncharted territory. "So," Isaac said, "I guess we'll find out what this looks like on the outside." "I guess we will." "Isaac, are you sure about this?" "About us. Because once I walk out of here, we can't go back to the safety of professional boundaries and delayed possibilities." "I'm sure." "Are you?" "I've been sure for 3 years. I'm just worried about the reality living up to the anticipation." Isaac smiled, the first completely unguarded expression I'd seen from him in 5 years. Only one way to find out. 6 months later, Isaac and I were sharing a small apartment in the city, building a life that was both ordinary and extraordinary. I'd found work as a financial counselor for a nonprofit that helped formerly incarcerated individuals with money management, and Isaac continued his work in corrections while pursuing a graduate degree in social justice. "Any regrets?" Isaac asked one evening as we cooked dinner together, moving around the kitchen with the ease of people who'd learned to share space and decisions. "About falling in love with my warden? About waiting 5 years to have a real relationship? About completely appending both our lives for the possibility of happiness? Any of it. All of it." I looked around our apartment, at the life we'd built together after years of careful distance and professional boundaries. It wasn't the life either of us had planned, but it was honest and real and based on a foundation of respect and understanding that most people never find. "None," I said honestly. "Though I still can't believe you were willing to wait for me. Some people are worth waiting for. Some connections are worth the risk." As Isaac pulled me close for a kiss that tasted like possibility and home, I marveled at the strange path that had brought us together. I'd gone to prison expecting to lose everything, and instead I'd found the love of my life. Sometimes the most valuable things come from the most unexpected places, and sometimes the people who see your worth when you can't see it yourself are the ones worth building a future with. "I love you," I told Isaac, words I'd wanted to say for years but could never speak safely. "I love you too," he replied. "Past, present, and future.